hack. I don't spend all that time preparing different ingredients like Ma. 3/4 of the work is done. So now I can make fresh, delicious pera and laddu in about 15 minutes with the convenience of Chattak's laddu and pera mithai mix. Now Ma's kitchen is a Chattak kitchen.
In Hinduism, cow's milk is revered, and from the finest milk comes our ghee. When offered into the sacred fire, cow ghee carries our prayers to the deities, unlike processed vegetable ghee. From your devotion to your delicious dishes, you can trust Anchor Cow Brand Ghee. For all occasions, use the best ghee. Enjoy the best food and delicacies, and have the best Diwali with Anchor Cow Brand Ghee.
I am Dr. Delphina Ovid, your friendly neighborhood dentist. At Community Hospital Dental Clinic, we offer examinations which include x-rays, basic oral cancer screening, and a treatment plan. We also offer cleanings, fillings, extractions, root canal treatment, and complete and partial dentures. Remember, you don't have to brush and floss all your teeth, just the ones you want to keep.
Give us a call at 235-5479.
The Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist,
where good private health care is affordable.
Good morning, welcome back to AM Prime. So today, all eyes are on the national budget, and MSJ leader David Abdullah says this is the government's first real test to show whether it can tackle the foreign exchange crunch, revive jobs, and restore confidence in the economy. So this morning, Mr. Abdullah will be joining me. We'll discuss his take on what must happen in today's budget to move the country forward. Good morning, Mr. Abdullah.
Morning, Naomi. Thanks for having me on AM Prime, and morning to all who are tuned in.
Yes, thank you. So, getting straight into it, you said that the 2026 budget will set the government's course. So, let's see if we can break that down a bit. What would the ideal budget look like to you at the end of this of the budget report this afternoon?
Yes, well, I did say this is a critical budget, very consequential, one of the most consequential in our country's history, or recent history, I should say. And that is, first of all, it's the first budget by the UNC after 10 years of the PNM. And therefore, what is the economic direction for the country that will be laid out in this budget through policies articulated by the Minister of Finance and other ministers? The whole country has been on hold in terms of the direction of the economy. I mean, we've been hearing a lot from the government in terms of crime and, all of those things. International relations, unfortunately, as you know, they've taken positions that I don't agree with. But in terms of the economy, I think everybody is on edge. I was in the supermarket yesterday morning and buying newspapers or something, and one gentleman said to me, "We're all waiting to see what happens tomorrow." And I say, yes, the whole country is waiting. Yeah. So that is why it is so consequential. Also because the country's economic situation is not good. We all are aware of the declining foreign exchange reserves and the rapid drawdown on those reserves over the last few years. We know about the increases in prices that people have been experiencing over 6-7 years without any increase in incomes, particularly tens of thousands of workers who haven't had a wage increase, retirees, pensioners who haven't had an increase in their retirement income, and then of course you have persons on social benefits or what we call social grants that are also on fixed incomes while prices are going up. So in those circumstances, people's lives have deteriorated, the quality of life has deteriorated as the standard of living has gone down with increased prices and stagnant incomes, fixed incomes. So that has to be addressed. But on the other hand, government revenues are in difficulty because of the problems in our energy sector. We are still dependent on the energy sector, both for earning of foreign exchange, and that is the principal reason why we have a foreign exchange problem, because our earnings of foreign exchange have been going down with oil and gas prices being relatively low and oil and gas production being low and falling, and petrochemical production also falling. So those activities, economic activities of oil and gas and downstream of gas and petrochemicals also is a main contributor to government revenue. So we have a real crisis. Then you have rising unemployment. The government has sent home tens of thousands of workers, and these workers are the vulnerable people in our society. Last Tuesday talk, we had an excellent discussion with young sociologist Adiola Young, and she laid out the analysis of how people's lives have been very badly affected. Persons who are working in URP and CPEP and forestry and so on. So this is the situation. Infrastructure in the country is in bad shape. There are schools that need to be built. Some schools have started and never were completed. You have the equipping of hospitals, roads, water. All of these infrastructure issues are vital to people having a decent life and also to increasing productivity and productive output of the economy. So there are a whole range of issues, but fundamentally, I think that what we need to hear from the Minister of Finance is what is the trajectory, what is the direction, what are the plans, the general plans for one, to use a hackneyed phrase, a term that has been misused and abused, diversification of the economy. I prefer to say the transformation of the economy, so that we get new sectors or existing sectors operating at a much higher level to earn more foreign exchange, to employ more people, and so on, and to generate economic activity, which will then, and growth, which will then lead to higher government revenue. So the transformation of the economy, I think, is what is the most important factor or issue that we need to hear from, and not just platitudes, but specific plans and proposals. The government has been there now for 6 months, and therefore within that time, ministries ought to have been able to develop very specific plans for transformation going forward.
Yeah, I agree. When we look at the employment crisis, or rather unemployment crisis, do you think that it would make sense to say, well, if the government could restart those programs, the CPEP, URP, to stimulate employment? Or should that just be scrapped and new, more productive jobs be invested into?
Well, certainly URP and CPEP workers are performing functions that are necessary. And I'm sure we have all seen the grass getting very long all over the country and so on, and other aspects of work. I heard the Prime Minister say, that what are the regional corporations doing? The workers in the regional corporations should be doing that work. The reality is that many, many moons ago, under previous governments, the functions of local government were scrapped in terms of things like grass cutting and work of that type, because those functions used to be performed by local government bodies. Days before you knew about these things, the county councils, right, which were replaced by the regional corporations. And those jobs were permanent jobs, and governments then decided that they didn't want them to be permanent jobs. They wanted them to be short-term temporary jobs to reduce the cost of it, because with a permanent job you have to provide, terms and conditions of employment for a permanent worker. They were unionized, and so those jobs were gotten rid of, and we got these short-term, insecure, precarious employment for tens of thousands of people. But the functions that they carried out were very important. And when I hear people saying, CPEP should be more productive, but I ask anybody to go out at 6 o'clock in the morning and work for longer than 4.5 hours in the hot sun outside. It's physically demanding work, and you really can't do that work beyond a certain time of the day. It's not physically possible. And so those people who sit in air-conditioned offices and so on and say, oh, they should be working longer hours, really should try it themselves. Because if you try and cut your grass yourself and you spend more than an hour, you really need to get inside and take a break. So what we have proposed, both as MSJ and the People's Roundtable, have taken up that policy position, is to convert CPEP from being workers, from being employees of a contractor. Because you see, when you have contractors, every time you have a change in government, you have this bacchanal that is party people, and is this one family and that one family, and this so on, getting too many contracts and so on. But all the parties have done that over the years.
Yes.
None of them have been exempt. So to get rid of the political patronage that is built into programs like CPEP, and not corruption and nepotism and so on, what you could do is to, as we have advocated, have the workers own the business as community cooperatives. So it really becomes a community project owned by members of the community as a cooperative. So they're not just employed, but they're also owners. And for them to do other kinds of activities, not just dealing with the environmental in terms of cutting grass, but training them up, upskilling them to do other kinds of work, maintenance work on recreation grounds, pavilions, schools and things like that, so that the community then builds a sense of pride and ownership in the facilities that are built by the state, but for the benefit of everyone. And in this way, we wouldn't see those infrastructure and facilities as the government owned. We will see it as we own, as the communities own. And I think that will change a lot of the thinking, quite apart from enabling people to own a business collectively in a cooperative. And the credit unions can play a key role in helping to finance those and provide the training and skills necessary for people in community-based cooperatives. And URP has been a problem with ghost gangs for decades. I mean, a good friend, former comrade of mine who sadly passed away a couple of years ago, Jimmy Singh, he led what was then known as the Dude Workers Committee, which was the Dude workers who were employed semi-permanently. They were members of the National Union of Government and Federated Workers, and he led the Dude Workers section of NUGFW, and Dude then became LID under the NER, the Labor Intensive Development Program, and then LID eventually became URP when the PNM came back in. And there were ghost gangs going back not to the due days, but certainly in the early part of URP, there were ghost gangs. And as he used to describe them, the bad boys on the block, used to take over a lot of the projects and have people's names down who are not working and collecting checks on their behalf and cashing them in. Or you used to have persons who got a job but who had to pay, sadly and in a very terrible way, to the bad boys to get a job, particularly women. And so there was a lot of that happening going back decades. And it happened under the People's Partnership, it happened under the UNC when the UNC was in government in 1995, 2001, and so on. So this has been going on for a long time. So yes, that has to be dealt with and reformed in a fundamental way. Yes, but to get rid of all of the workers was not the way to go, because you then put them on the breadline without an income, having families to deal with. And therefore, increasing the potential for criminal activity, actually. So reformation is needed, but certainly those people need incomes, and unless there is some other activity immediately available to them, organized by the government or by the private sector, for them to get employment, then the only way to deal with employment for that section of the national community is programs like CPEP and URP, but reform in the way that I've described.
Yeah, so definitely, as you said, reformation is needed for these programs, and I think what we can look out for is restructuring, a definite restructuring to safeguard these employees or these contract workers.
Yes, and the thing is that that restructuring should have been, you shouldn't have sent home everybody.
Yeah.
And then it signaled that the government came in without a plan as to how to deal with those programs, yes?
Yeah.
And they would have known the problems beforehand. So they needed to have a plan so that even as you said, you had to deal with some contractors who ought not to have had a contract, there was a way to do that and transition people so you don't cut them off from an income right away. I'm not talking about the contractors, I'm talking particularly about the workers, the tens of thousands of workers who were badly affected, yes?
Yeah.
And so that was badly handled. It was very badly done.
Yeah. If we look at diversification, I know that is a topic that many have had, and we are not quite seeing anything coming out of it or being done about diversifying our economy. And looking at this budget, what is one thing that you believe or that you think should be included to make diversification a reality in this upcoming fiscal year?
Yeah, well, the last time that you and I met and Jada met face to face was at the Trade Investment Convention organized by the TTMA.
Yes.
And so when you walked, I'm sure you walked the whole floor. I mean, it's a massive set of activities that were taking place there. But you did see the seeds of diversification with a lot of micro and small producers doing creative things, foods and wines and craft and so on. And I think that is an area, therefore, that we need to enable and facilitate those businesses to grow, so that we need a buy local campaign. So that's the first element of the roundtable I articulated, a massive buy local campaign, so that retailers, big supermarket chains, I wouldn't bother name them on your program, but I think we all know the big supermarket chains, should be by policy, company policy, putting priority on our own micro and small producers and not on imported goods. So instead of having a whole shelf of imported wines and so on, we should have a whole shelf in priority viewing for consumers to buy of local wines, just as one example. And similarly for a range of other kinds of products. Our pharmacies and big pharmaceutical pharmacy chains should have as priority on the shelves locally produced creams and lotions and whatever cleansers and all the things that are consumed and so on, rather than having a lot of imported items. And so that is one, a massive buy local campaign. The government should set the example. Every government function should utilize locally produced food and beverages and not utilize any imported items. So a massive buy local campaign should be one. And that has to be then linked back to agriculture, because an economy is about, to use economic jargon, forward and backward linkages. In other words, if you have the manufacturing of items, then you want to go backwards to see what are the local inputs to that. So, for example, we need to ramp up research and development of our local plants and herbs and so on in relation to what they can be used as inputs to pharmaceutical products, cosmetic products and so on. And then our local food producers, agriculture, then has to ramp up in terms of increasing our food products processing that will then be highlighted on our supermarket shelves. And so that's a backward linkage. And then the forward linkage now is our marketing and creative people to advertise and brand and so on. That's a forward linkage. And in that way, you get an economy that is integrated internally. And then you increase the capacity to be able to export. And so a lot of our local cosmetic items, wines and so on could be exported, and that will earn foreign exchange. So that is how you transform the economy, not just diversify in terms of what product and so on, but really transform in a fundamental way. So we begin to produce what we consume instead of consuming what we do not produce. And then we have surplus because we build up capacity and so on. So we have surplus to export, and therefore we earn foreign exchange outside of oil and gas. So buy local and therefore strengthening the backward and forward linkages, use economic terminology. The second area is the creative sector, because last night I happened to be tuned into one of the television stations, and there was a lovely concert that was done a year ago, I think it was, by Johanna, the piano girl. And the talent on show there was fantastic. And I mean, I've been to many other concerts, whether like Christmas is coming and I go to Lydian's concert, Carnival time, there's Free Canal or Freetown Collective, and then there are other shows, there are pan shows. I went to Birdsong's Academy, and they had a symphony orchestra really of young people, of teenagers performing, and that's fantastic. So we have so much creative ability, but we have never harnessed that in an organized way, so that we, for example, in the Roundtable have articulated the need to have a calendar of cultural events, so that we then link that to tourism. So not only locals attending, but also foreigners, whether from the Caribbean or elsewhere, will come in for 10 days of concerts by our choirs. So you have Signal Hill, and you have Jean Agape, and you have Lydians and Marionettes and the other top choirs and so on performing, and you have your John Michael Thomases and others doing their thing. So you come to a concert week, if you wish. And then during the daytime, you go to a heritage city, which is East Port of Spain, where we have recreated the barrack yards where, the pioneers would have been tuning pans, so people could see how a pan is tuned, and you see what a calypso tent really looked like in the 20s and the 30s. And you see performers, and you buy the CDs, and you buy a steel pan, whether it is a fully tuned tenor pan for X thousand US dollars, or you buy a miniature pan, and you buy a T-shirt with Spree Simon or Bertie Marshall or any of our other creative pan tuners on it. And so people go away with memorabilia, because memorabilia is part of what you go. If you go to Disney World, it's not just a ticket price, but you're buying stuff for the children, right? Or for yourself, depending on what your likes are. And that's how money is being made. And you buy a CD or you buy a DVD and so on. And so the films about our steel pan and so on, and about our Calypsonians and other aspects of our creative experience. You buy DVDs of that, and that then creates all kinds of opportunities of employment, and you get food and beverages, local food. So that is what we have to do in the way that Old Havana is, for example, or Old Cartagena, Old San Juan, Old Santo Domingo. I visited all of those places, and you could see what a heritage city can look like and what it can bring in. So that's another creative sector. Our film, we just had, I was out of the country, so I missed it, but the Trinidad and Tobago Film Festival. So there are possibilities, and there was a Caribbean Film Festival, there's an African film festival that we do. So all of those things. Then you have Bocas Lit Festival of Literature. So all of these things can bring people into Trinidad and Tobago. If there's a calendar of activities, there's Tobago Heritage and other things that take place in Tobago. Then we talk about, which is a proposal that was first made by the then President General of the OWTO, Errol K. McLeod, and he took that up when he was Minister of Labor. There was a cabinet committee. I was actually a member of that committee, a cabinet appointed committee, but it didn't get anywhere. For Faizabad to be, in Faizabad to have a Labor Heroes Park and Museum, and then added to that an oil industry information center and museum. And then you link a whole tour into Faizabad with going to Labre, the Pitch Lake, and then also to the site of the Banwari Man, which is near Penal. So that's all within a very close radius. And therefore you create a cluster of activity to which people would come. So if a cruise ship comes in, they then hop onto a couple water taxis, head down to San Fernando, they get into Maxis, and from San Fernando down to Faizabad is no time with the highway, and down to Penal, Labre, no time at all, back to San Fernando, back to the cruise ship. That's a whole tour, yes, and school children and so on. So there are a whole set of things that we could do to fundamentally transform the economy. The steel pan industry, my late comrade Nestor Sullivan, brilliant pan in his former manager of Panbury, who also sadly passed away, was a political comrade of mine, as was Jimmy Singh. Nestor identified the markets in Japan, in Africa, in Latin America, and China, for example, for the steel pan. You can imagine Trinidad and Tobago producing tens of thousands of high-quality instruments, a tenor pan going at, I don't know, $2,000–3,000 US or whatever, and you're producing tens of thousands of those for export to schools and orchestras throughout the world.
Do we still
Branded
have
Trinidad and Tobago.
Do we still do we still have a sector, or that produces steel pans?
Yes, there is a steel pan manufacturing company, Mittal, I think it is, not Mittal, so I've got the name wrong. And there are other people who are producing steel pans. There's Mr. Cooper in Laventille, and he also produces pans. But the scale that we need is nowhere near the demand. So if there's a demand and you market, then you create the backward linkage to have the steel pan manufacturing industry. But to have the steel pan manufacturing industry, you need to have pan tuners. You don't simply want it to be mechanically. Some things can be done mechanically. You could sync the drum mechanically and so on, but the real tuning has to be done by master tuners. But we don't have enough of them. So in our schools, there is a program, and other comrades of mine, Andre Moses and Pat Townsend, developed in schools a curriculum with a qualification, a CVQ qualification for pan tuning. But the schools have not developed that significantly. Only a few schools do it, because you have to have a separate room that may be soundproof for them, the students to be able to do the tuning. But if we have that, then some of our students who not interested in doing things like history and, well, I don't want to say history, but other kinds of subjects could do pan tuning and could earn a very good income as pan tuners and so on, not just here in Trinidad and Tobago. But if you have pans exported, then they will also have to go abroad from time to time to blend the pans and so on, and have those pans properly kept. So again, you create a whole ecosystem, around that. Yes, we have also advocated that every steel band that has its pan yard that is on state land should get the deed and title to that land. So those steel bands will then have capital which they can then utilize for the development of the band and create academies and youth programs and a whole range of activities all year round. Set up small businesses and crafts and food activities like perhaps some of the big pan yards or steel bands have done. So there's a whole set of things that could be done in that regard as well.
So one of the things that I saw recently speaking of the budget, and yes, we're seeing all these, we have great options actually for ways to diversify and ways to improve the economy. But one of the things that the Prime Minister said is that the budget will run a sizable deficit this year. And she said in an interview that, the government inherited a lot of, bad treasury stocks and a lot of borrowing. So when we look at, so we're expected to see, I guess, expenditure outweighing revenue. But she also said that they're finding ways, or they're trying to find ways to supplement those revenues and finance the deficits, right? If that is possible, what are some of the ways that that we can expect to see that they might choose to do to finance the deficits?
Yeah, and let me just I'll come and answer that question explicitly in a second, but there are two other sectors that we could identify for immediate activity being increased. One is the scrap iron sector, the scrap metal sector, which has been terribly frustrated. In fact, I understand from the president of the Trinidad and Tobago Scrap Iron Dealers Association, who's been in touch with me, because CEDA is a member of the round table, that the license for them to function actually expired a few days ago, and has, for some reason, there was some bureaucratic delay and has not been renewed. So the scrap sector now is essentially shut down. But the bureaucracy that was set up by the last government frustrated the industry. So that industry earns foreign exchange and employs people. So that needs to be restarted and the bureaucracy removed immediately so that industry could thrive. And it helps the environment because people then don't throw stuff out in rivers and that kind of thing. So they're turning what is, of little or no value to anybody into wealth and foreign exchange. So that's important. And the other one, of course, is the restart of the refinery at Point of Pierre. So in terms of your question about how does the government, Minister of Finance, deal with the fiscal deficit, the gap between expenditure and revenue, there is no easy solution to that. Unless the economy grows and unless you get more revenue. Now, the fact of the matter is that many ministers of finance identified that there is a gap of collection of taxes that may amount to anywhere between $5 and $15 million a year. Now, that would close the fiscal deficit right away if the government could collect all the taxes that are due. So the PNM wanted to go the route of the Revenue Authority. We disagreed with that. We thought that BIR could be tightened up. In fact, when I was on the EDAP, I had started doing some work together with other colleagues, we didn't finish it, on how to improve the functioning of BIR. So there are ways of getting every company and every professional on the tax roll, the list of people who ought to be paying taxes, and then systematically ensuring that they pay the taxes that are due. So there are things that can be done, quite simply using technology and getting a proper listing of everybody who should be paying taxes. So we may hear something about that in the budget. That would be one way of trying to close the fiscal deficit, of collecting all the taxes that are due. One big area of taxes is the transfer pricing that is done by the multinationals in the gas industry and downstream of gas, because they sell the gas to their another subsidiary of the same multinational at a price below market price. So we get the taxes on the price that they sell, but when they then sell at market price, they make a super profit and we don't get it. And that is what is known as transfer pricing. And the country loses tax revenue. And that has been spoken about by past ministers of finance going back 10 or more years, but nothing has been done. The last minister said he's getting advice from IMF or whoever, but that never became reality. So if we deal with transfer pricing, then we could get another $4 or $5 billion in taxes that are owed to Trinidad and Tobago. So those things would help to close the fiscal deficit, but we don't know if they're going to implement that and how quickly that will be implemented. In the absence of those types of measures, which is collecting more tax revenue, the only other means of closing the deficit, there are only two things. One, to borrow, and two, to go into the Heritage and Stabilization Fund, both of which were done on many occasions by the last government. So we will wait and see what the Minister of Finance says later today. I suspect that although they were very critical of the PNM in going into the HSF, that they will do that, because not only will that bring in some revenue for the government, it will also bring in foreign exchange. Because if you bring in, say, $200 million US out of the HSF, just for argument's sake, that $200 million goes to the central bank, and the central bank then has $200 million US more to provide the local consumption of forex. The central bank then will give the Trinidad and Tobago government, well, the Minister of the Treasury will then get 200 million multiplied by 6.7 or 6.8 or whatever it is. So 1.5 billion TT dollars will then be available to the Minister of Finance to finance his budget. So I suspect they will go into the HSF. By how much, we don't know. Foreign borrowing is the other means, but really going after the taxes that are due is the biggest way.
There was a recent report when the Prime Minister came back from the UN General Assembly that she was able to secure money, or I don't know if it, I don't have my information correct, if it was a loan or if it was a gift from.
What was from China?
China, yes.
Yes, and it wasn't clear, you're right, and I will probably have to go back and read the press reports of what she said as to whether it was a loan or a grant. But that, I suppose, will be clarified. The Minister of Finance will probably refer to those things.
So we can expect to see how,
Yes, and I'm sure they're going to tout Dragon, but there's no, first of all, there's no certainty about Dragon at this point in time, because my understanding is that from what reading between the lines, that what the U.S. Treasury Department issued was a 6-month OFAC license to enable the government to enter into negotiations with the government of Venezuela. In other words, it was not a license to produce, it was a license to establish terms and conditions for the production of gas from the Dragon gas field. Now, several things are hurdles there. First of all, we don't know what the conditionalities are in that OFAC license, and therefore whether those conditionalities would mean that Venezuela would simply say, no, we're not prepared to execute the license which we gave Trinidad and Tobago, 30-year license to produce gas under those conditions, because Venezuela could simply say those conditions are not sufficiently beneficial to us to enable Trinidad and Tobago to produce gas from Dragon. So there are several hurdles to cross, and in any case, even if all those hurdles are crossed, and that will take several months of backwards and forwards negotiation, then it will take another 2.5 years before first gas comes into Trinidad. And so we are ready end of 2025. We're talking about, at best, 2028 for first gas. So given the fact that if the Trump administration didn't cancel the OFAC license earlier this year, then we would have been on stream for first gas in 2027. So we're going to lose at least a year, assuming all the hurdles can be crossed, and the geopolitics between the U.S. and Venezuela is very bad. And of course, Trinidad and Tobago has taken a position in support of Washington, which Venezuela obviously will not be happy with, and we don't know what the implications of that will be in how Venezuela meets and treats for Trinidad and Tobago.
Do you think that I'll say the most vulnerable people right now, which would just be your average citizen, would feel the brunt of it if the government is not able to maintain some sort of fiscal responsibility? I mean, while we are operating in deficit territory, you know, after the budget, once everything is laid, how can the government, I mean, what is the best way that we could, you know, protect the vulnerable citizens? Because that would be, yeah, go ahead, no, sorry.
Sorry, no, you're right. At minimum, they cannot reduce anything.
Yeah.
You know, at minimum, they can't reduce any of the social benefits. And they will also have to re-employ people in CPEP and URP.
Yeah.
Because those are tens of thousands of vulnerable people. So that's your floor level. I rather suspect that they will identify an increase in the minimum wage as one way of dealing with people who are, you know, struggling to survive, because very few government employees work for the minimum wage, and therefore it will not necessarily increase government recurrent expenditure significantly. So I think that is one thing that they can do, and that will help people at the lower end and give them some more political breathing space, if you wish, to take on some of the more difficult tasks. A second thing, now they talked about removing VAT on food items. Now, a lot of the basic food items are zero rated in any case. So I don't know what else they can remove VAT on. You certainly do not want to remove VAT on items that are imported, that we could produce locally, or even items that are imported. You really want, in my view, to increase the tariffs on a lot of imported food items. Breakfast cereals, for example, we produce breakfast cereals locally, even if we use imported inputs, but we produce breakfast cereals locally. So why should we put higher tariffs on breakfast cereals coming out of the US? And you know all the brands, right?
Yeah.
But Mr. Trump tore up the World Trade Organization arrangements where he unilaterally imposed tariffs on countries that were contrary to WTO rules. So if he tore up the rules, why should we abide by rules, you know, which were not level playing field rules in the first place? So we should be raising tariffs on imported foods. That will reduce our food import bill, and it will also maybe give us, the government, some more revenue. The other thing would be, how does the Minister of Finance deal with the 10% wage increase, salary increase that was committed to prior to the elections? Certainly the biggest factor in that is back pay. So there are two elements. One is the increased annual expenditure by increasing the pay levels, and the second part of it is the back pay. The back pay is what is difficult because it's a bullet payment, it's a huge payment that the government has to find, and so that would be difficult, I think, for the government to pay back pay in one go. My own recommendation would be, as the last government paid VAT refunds by way of bonds, and persons could have cashed in their bonds at a bank, the back pay could be paid as bonds with the workers who need the cash to be able to encash those bonds at, say, credit unions or in banks and other unit trusts and so on, which would then not be able to encash. The financial institutions can't cash it, but would hold those bonds and would redeem those bonds from the government with interest in 5 years or 6 years, as the case may be, when the country's fortunes are hopefully improved. So that is one way of providing people with back pay. And how do they deal with the recurrent? Well, they would then have to find, you know, either borrowing or HSF or other things to get the money to pay the 10%. But we will see what the Minister of Finance does in that regard.
Yes. I do want to start wrapping up the conversation, but what is your message to citizens watching right now, and waiting, and we're to pay attention to, what to pay attention to once the budget begins to unfold and we start to hear the numbers being called? What should the average citizen really focus on in order to keep the government accountable later on?
Yes, so that's a key question. Certainly, the average citizen is going to be concerned about his or her standard of living, well-being, and whether this budget is going to improve their standard of living by some of those measures I just mentioned, increasing the minimum wage, the restart of the Petroleum refinery, which will inject, depending on where the financing is coming from, a lot of foreign exchange and so on. So I think some of those things, whether CPEP is going to be restarted, how it's going to be restarted, when, all of those things people are going to be paying attention to, the average person out there. Whether old age pension can be increased, I think that's problematic because NIS is in trouble. So what are the steps going to be taken to strengthen the national insurance system to get self-employed people being part of NIS, so that, if you're a taxi driver, you're paying NIS, so that when you can no longer drive your taxi, you get an NIS pension instead of depending on an old age pension. These were things that, when I was chair of the Labour Social Security Subcommittee of Vision 2020, 23 years ago, we had recommended. That's a whole generation, Naomi. That's your generation, right? And had those things been done when the country was flush with money at that time, our social security for our senior citizens would have been in, 500% better condition than it is now. But all right, I'm lamenting things that were just not listened to, not done by governments past. So obviously people are going to be paying attention to those things. Business people are going to be paying attention to things like crime and so on, and the ease of doing business. Vested interest like scrap iron dealers going to want to hear what's going to happen to their industry. Oil workers going to want to hear what's going to happen with the refinery. Farmers are going to hear what's going to be happening with agriculture. So different sectors are going to be looking at different things. Those creatives are going to want to know whether they're going to get support. Micro enterprises, whether they're going to be able to improve their businesses and grow and so on. So those are different sectors we're going to hear. Young people want to know what's in it for us, what's going to happen to employment, because youth unemployment is significant, not only for young people who don't have 5 CSEC passes, but also university graduates. We're hearing the Minister of Finance saying that he wants people to come home, but come home to what? What are the areas of economic activity that will gainfully utilize the skills of people in the diaspora, and what are the areas of economic activity that can gainfully employ our young people who are coming out of our schools and universities, because there are no jobs for them, there are no economic activities for them. I know that, the Minister of Health said he has applications for 500 doctors, he has no place for them. So we need to hear about those. Young people need to hear about those things. Women who are going to want to hear about what's going to happen to improve security for women folk who get killed routinely, sadly, femicides. So different sectors are going to want to hear different things. And so everybody is supposed to be tuned in to hear what they want to hear in this budget, and will assess at the end of the day what has taken place. Last year I wasn't on your morning program, AM Prime. I think I was on your evening program, but I don't know what you're doing this year with your post-budget analysis. But it's good to be with you, Naomi.
Yes,
thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Abdullah. We do have a post-budget panel discussion tonight, and I hope we have good things to report, good things to talk about. We would love to have you on later. I think we can just have your input so we can discuss.
I wasn't begging for a spot. It's all right. I was just saying that I was with you last year in the morning I mean, in the night and not in the morning, so we kind of
Right.
switch it around.
Yeah.
But I'll be glad to come on, AM Prime a morning this week, to discuss what we'll discuss this morning and to see what has happened.
Yes,
because I'm actually after the budget. I'll be taking in the budget, obviously, and then I'm doing something out of Argentina, looking at what is happening globally with international debt, the extractive sector, climate change, and issues around that. And so there's a whole, I'm a member of a jury on a panel that is known as the People's Tribunal and Nature Tribunal. And that starts, I think, at 4 and ends at 7. So I'm going to kind of switch off of one and go into the other.
Right. Okay.
So I'll be pretty exhausted after 7 o'clock tonight.
Yes, understood.
But I'll be quite happy to come on sometime with you in the
Definitely, because it's a conversation that we have to continue and we have to have. So
Yes.
I look forward to that. Thanks again for joining me this morning. And the entire country will be tuning in later today. Hopefully it's positive and we are able to see some real change occur after today's
Thanks a lot.
budget. All right,
Take
Mr.
care.
Abdullah, have a great day.
You too.
All right, so that brings us to the end of AM Prime this morning. I will leave you with this. Do what you can with what you have where you are. Do what you can with what you have where you are. I think this is perfect for today and what we are expecting to see for the budget this afternoon. And definitely, meditate on it, think about it, and enjoy the rest of your day. Go forth and do your best today. We have Sean Michael Small now at 8 o'clock with Talking Point. Also, do not forget that WSN will have its usual post-budget discussion this afternoon starting 7 p.m. till about 9:30 p.m. So you can tune in for that to, just get a complete breakdown of what happened, what was discussed at the budget for 2025-2026. So I will see you back here again later this evening and then Wednesday morning. So have a great day. Bye-bye.
WESN.
The season of lights is bright and tasty with Royal Castle's delightful veggie burger made with a healthy and nutritious patty. It's great on its own or in a combo with one side and a 16-ounce drink. So whether it's lunch, dinner or a snack, Royal Castle's veggie burger fits right in with your fasting and festivities. Happy Diwali from Royal Castle.
Very first day they opened, my mother and my father and I came in here. I love to see it. It's neat, really, really neat.
We have